Hello, today is Sunday, August 30th, 2020. The great pandemic continues. We're still unable to meet in our chapel at Park Place. We'll begin our worship service today, as we do each week, with a couple of songs that my wife Elizabeth and I will sing. The first song this morning is I Am Thine, O Lord. I am thine, O Lord, I have heard thy voice, and it told thy love to me. But I long to rise in the arms of faith and be closer drawn to thee. Draw me nearer, 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 blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died. Draw me nearer, 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 blessed Lord, to thy precious bleeding side. There are depths of love that I cannot know till I cross the narrow sea. There are heights of joy that I may not reach till I rest in peace with thee. Draw me nearer, 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 blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died. Draw me nearer, 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 blessed Lord, to thy precious bleeding side. Next song will be My God and I. My God and I go in the fields together. We walk and talk as good friends should and do. We clasp our hands, our voices ring with laughter. My God and I walk through the meadows hewn. We clasp our hands, our voices ring with laughter. My God and I walk through the meadows hewn. My God and I will go for aye together. We'll walk and talk as good friends should and do. This earth will pass, and with it common trifles, but God and I will go unendingly. This earth shall pass, and with it common trifles, but God and I will go unendingly. Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, as I mentioned earlier, of course, this dread disease is still afflicting our country and our world. As a matter of fact, I think today in India was the most cases they've had in a single day through this whole time, and it's just across the globe. In the United States, we still have about 1,000 deaths a day here. We have over 180,000 deaths, and just so much going on. Our schools have reopened, and with some degree of success. There have been some problems around the country with school openings, but our administrators and our teachers are working through these problems, and hopefully we'll be able to return to some sort of a sense of normal. We know that our children need to have their education, and we just want to be continuing to pray for those people. We also want to pray for our cities that have been in the midst of such violent protests and various activities going on. We just want to pray for peace for those communities, and we've just got a lot going on in the world today. And what we're going to talk about today, though, we're going to talk about a fellow in the Old Testament. We've been in the New Testament for a while. We're going to talk about a fellow named Naaman. Now, Naaman was a great commander in the Syrian army, and he suffered from a disease called leprosy. So I'm going to just read a little bit from 2 Kings 5 to sort of set the stage for the story. Now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, the king, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but a leper. And the Syrians had gone out on raids and brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel. And she waited on Naaman's wife. Then she said to her mistress, "If only my master were with the prophet who's in Samaria, he would heal him of this leprosy. And Naaman went in and told his master, saying, Thus and thus saith the girl who is in from the land of Israel. Then the king of Syria said, Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. Now let's just sort of set the stage for this story a little bit. The politics of this is really strange. The Lord has helped deliver the children of Israel into the hands of the Syrians. This great victory that Naaman had was over the very children of Israel that were God's people. This was one of those times when they were in such rebellion to God that he allowed other countries to conquer them, and in this case, that country was Syria. Now think about this. There was this girl who had been brought from Israel. She'd been captured. Maybe her family had been killed. She had been brought from Israel to Damascus to take care of this Syrian leader's wife. She was her servant. And when she saw what was going on with Naaman and saw him suffering with this disease, even though she was a captive slave, she had compassion on him. And this servant has a great part in this story, just a real central role, because she says, if only he could go to the man in Samaria. There is a man of God in my home country that can heal him. Well, word spreads about this. She tells Naaman's wife. Naaman's wife tells Naaman. Then Naaman goes to the king. Now remember, the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, is the very king that has conquered Israel. So here we are. We've got his leader that has conquered the children of Israel, that has this disease and wants to go ask for a favor in Israel. He wants to be healed. So what the king decides he'll do is he's going to send a letter to the king of Israel. You know the king of Israel was real eager to hear from the king of Syria after what had happened to them. So he writes this letter and he sends all sorts of valuable goods with Naaman to go to the king of Israel. Now think about this. He actually sent about 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, lots of clothes, various things. So Naaman shows up with this letter. Here he comes into Israel, and the king sees him coming. What do you think he thought? What else do they want from us? What are they going to take this time? So pretty soon he saw that Naaman came in peace. So he reached out to Naaman and said, why are you here? And he said, I brought all these great things for you because I've got a letter from the king of Syria asking you to heal me of this leprosy. The king knew he had turned on God. He wasn't worshiping the true God. He was lost. He was so distraught. He thought, what's going to happen to me when I can't deliver this promise, this request? When I can't deliver healing for Naaman, what will they do to my country next? He rent his clothes. He was so upset with what happened. And then Elisha comes into the story. Now, a little bit about leprosy. We just sort of set the stage here. It was a dread disease. It was horrible. It probably at some point would have killed Naaman. And even though he was a great commander, this leprosy put him in the lowest rungs of society. As a member of society, he would be shunned by other people. Now, obviously, he was leading his military, but probably with some social distancing, as we're so familiar with these days. He probably kept his distance, and they wouldn't want to get too close to him for fear that this might be something they could catch. The kind of leprosy that we're familiar with in this country that we've dealt with in the last centuries is a disease called Hansen's disease. And we believe that was a little different kind of leprosy. We think Hansen's disease was brought to the Middle East about 350 years before the birth of Christ. And we think it came from India, that Alexander the Great, in one of his conquests of India, when they came back, the Hansen's disease was brought back with them. But regardless of the details of the nature of the disease, we know it was a skin disease. We know that it was bad, and it was something that really affected Naaman and his ability to do those things he needed to do. So here we've got the king of Israel, who's helpless to help him, tears his clothes, but up steps Elisha. Elisha says, so it was when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Please let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel." Now, how about that? He says, "You've turned on God in every way imaginable, king, but I'm here, and God listens to me. Send Naaman to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman and his entourage, obviously it was a pretty big group of people to carry that much gold and silver. It took several beasts of burden to carry that kind of weight. So they all go up to the house of Elisha. Now, you know that Naaman is no doubt expecting some real royal welcome here, that he's going to, the man of God's going to save him and hopefully help save the Israelites from future persecution by the Syrians. And so he goes up to Elisha's door, and Elisha doesn't come out. Now, this is kind of infuriating. This doesn't sit well with Naaman. He's a man of authority. He's used to people responding to him. So he's not real happy at this situation. Have you ever been somewhere where you felt like you were ignored when you shouldn't have been? Have you ever been maybe in a doctor's office when you could see the doctor walking around back behind the counter, but he never would come and take care of whatever it was you needed to take care of? Ever got aggravated about something like that? Felt like you were just being ignored, knowing that he knew you were there, but chose to do other things? Or any other situation. We've all been in situations where we felt like we've been disrespected in one way or the other. And that's what happened with Naaman here. He felt like he was being disrespected, and it's about to get worse. Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, comes out and says, he doesn't need to see you. You just need to do what he says. And what he says you're to do is you're to go down to the River Jordan, and you dip yourself 7 times in the River Jordan, and you'll be cleansed of this leprosy. That sent Naaman over the edge. Just think about it. Not only has he not come out to talk to him, now he's given him some order that appears to be utterly foolish. How can the water of the Jordan River cure him of his leprosy? So he is in a rage. He says, "We've got better rivers in Damascus than you've got here. If I wanted to do that, I could have done that back home. What a waste of time. I cannot believe that I involved the king and all these people to go on this mission of foolishness. I never should have listened to that little Israeli servant girl." Well, once again, servants have a central role in this story. Just like the servant to Naaman's wife had a role, these servants of Naaman had a role. They said, "Wait just a minute, Commander, just wait a minute. If he had asked you to do some great thing in order to be healed, wouldn't you have done it? If he had asked for some monumental task to be done in exchange for healing, you would have done it. Yet all he's asked you to do is a very simple task. Just go down to the Jordan River and dip 7 times. Well, he went down to the Jordan River, he dipped 7 times, and guess what? His leprosy was healed. The power of God once again was shown through the story of this Gentile man, this Syrian, enemy of the Jews. But he was used, and these servants were used, and Elisha was used to tell this story of God's power. Not only of God's power, but the importance of following the directions we're given by God. God said, through Elisha, go dip in the Jordan 7 times. Naaman resisted. But when Naaman finally decided to follow God's direction, you see what happened. The story takes a couple of turns after that. He goes back to Elisha to thank him. And, he feels bad that he'd felt so bad about been so hateful earlier. And he goes back to the man of God and he says, please take some of these gifts I brought. I've got all this silver and all this gold. But we know that Elisha turned that down. He said, no. He said, as the Lord lives, or for whom I stand, I will receive nothing. And Naaman urged him to take it, but he refused. Now, there's a little sideline of the story that we're not going to spend much time on, but just to say what happened. After Naaman left, Gehazi, this servant, got greedy, went and told Naaman that Elisha changed his mind, that he needed some of this stuff, some of these riches for a couple of fellows needed some help, and could he help him out? So he loaded him up with silver and gold. Of course, goes back. Elisha says, "Where have you been?" Gehazi says, "I haven't been anywhere." And guess what? Gehazi was struck with leprosy, and he and his family suffered from that for generations to come, we're told. But that's not the primary focus of this story. This story is on the power of God and following God's direction. Another interesting thing about Naaman is that Jewish tradition says that he had already appeared in the book of 1 Kings. Listen to this. "Now a certain man drew a bow at random and struck the king of Israel between the joints of his armor, so that he said to the chariot driver, 'Turn around and take me out of the battle, for I am wounded.' And he died that evening." That king was Ahab. We know how evil King Ahab was. His wife Jezebel, how evil she was, and all the things that they did. But we're not told that soldier that shot Ahab, we're not told his name, but Jewish tradition seems to believe that this was indeed the same Naaman who later led the children of Israel, and who defeated the children of Israel in battle. One other time Naaman's mentioned in the Bible, where he is mentioned by name, and that's in the book of Luke. You know, we've been having lessons that were written by Luke here recently. We've got Luke today, just a little bit. In Luke 4, Jesus says, "Assuredly I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own country." And he goes on about several times where people were not accepting their own country. And he said, and many lepers were in Israel at the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian. So that's the story of Naaman the Syrian and his cleansing and his healing. He became a follower of God after that. He took some dirt back to Damascus with him he could use to do his worship of God. He said, "But one thing I need to ask," he said, "when my king tells me I've got to worship that false king, please don't hold it against me. I'm still going to know that God's the true God and worship him." And Elisha says to him, "Go in peace." That's a story for today. We're going to close as we always do with a prayer. Dear God, thank you for the ways you've blessed us. Thank you for the way you use us. Thank you for the way you use these servants in the story of Naaman. Help us to always understand that you're in charge and you're in control, and help us to follow your directions. Dear Lord, you've told us what you expect of us. Help us to meet those expectations. We ask that you'll be with our country in the light of the pandemic. Heal those that are sick, comfort those that have lost loved ones. We also ask that you'll be with the cities that are suffering from violent protest. Help peace to come into these communities that we may live peacefully one with another. Finally, dear Lord, we just want to ask your blessing on all of us. Help us to continue to try our best to keep safe from this disease and to do those things we need to do. Thank you for being our God. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Stay safe.